Do you know that all the material things we depend on come from resources in the earth? From the lumber needed to construct buildings and homes, to the fibers that make up daily newspapers, we also rely on minerals found in the Earth's crust to provide the metals that make up an incredible variety of products, from cars and airplanes to the beverage cans we use every day. Unfortunately, most of these natural resources are limited, but our appetite for consuming and discarding them is not. Just over 200 years ago, there were fewer than 1 billion people on Earth. Today, the count is at 5.5 billion people and growing. The demands from an ever-increasing population require more mining of minerals and logging of trees, both of which are limited resources. Mining and logging also create scars on landscapes, harmful pollution, and permanent loss of resources. In addition, increasing consumption generates growing mountains of trash. We'll first look at how two raw materials are extracted and then turned into finished products for our consumption. Later, we'll learn where consumed materials end up. And finally, we'll examine how recycling all kinds of materials is an excellent solution to conserving natural resources and working to ensure the health of our planet. What are these things that form the natural world we live in? They consist of renewable and non-renewable resources. Renewable resources are raw materials that usually can be generated by natural processes within one human lifespan. For example, where trees are cut down for timber, seedlings are planted that will grow to replace them. When water is drawn from lakes and reservoirs, rainfall can replenish the water supply. And when crops are harvested from patches of cultivated fields, new seed can be planted the following season. Non-renewable resources are earth materials that are finite. Once used, more will not be created in the foreseeable future. These include mineral deposits like iron, bauxite, manganese, and gold, as well as fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal, all formed over millions of years. So how do these natural resources become the vital ingredients of our everyday products? To understand, let's look at two common examples. First, at how aluminum is made, and then later, how paper is produced. The four major processes involved in producing aluminum are mining, milling, refining, and smelting. The first step of aluminum production is mining, where a non-renewable resource is removed from the earth. Although aluminum is a naturally occurring element, it does not exist in nature as pure aluminum, but rather as an aluminum oxide compound called bauxite. When bauxite is found in large concentrations, it's called an ore. Because mining any kind of metal is an expensive process, an ore deposit must contain enough of a metallic element like aluminum, copper, lead, or gold to justify the expense of removing it. As society's demand for products increases, ore deposits become scarcer, and mining companies must use less concentrated ores. This means they have to mine a lot more ore. For instance, it takes about 4,000 kilograms of bauxite to produce about 1,000 kilograms of aluminum. And for precious metals like gold, miners must extract about 1,000 kilograms of rock to get a mere gram of gold. Once ore is mined, it's ready for a second step where it's sent to a mill to be crushed. The concentrate, or valuable portion of the ore, is then separated from the unwanted waste materials. The volume of this waste rock can be enormous. Usually, these mill wastes, called tailings, are simply dumped close to the mines or in tailings ponds nearby. Tailings may contain toxic metals and acid-forming sulfide compounds, which rain and snow can carry into rivers and streams, contaminating fresh water and killing aquatic life. Mining companies are reversing some of these harmful side effects by reinforcing damaged tailings ponds and by reusing some of their waste products. They're also reclaiming mined areas by replacing and restoring the surface of the land as close as possible to its original condition. In the third step, the bauxite concentrate is transported by ship and unloaded at a factory called a refinery. Here, the crushed bauxite is mixed with chemicals, then cooked in huge tanks, cooled, washed, and filtered. The resultant solution is seeded with alumina crystals and dried to get the white powder called alumina. Notice how different the alumina looks from the original bauxite ore. The alumina is now ready for the last step, where it's taken to a smelter. Here, it's dissolved in a large steel carbon-lined pot. Then an electrode is lowered into the solution. A high-voltage current runs through the electrode and changes the alumina in solution into pure molten aluminum metal. It takes huge amounts of electricity to convert alumina powder to metallic aluminum. This energy usually comes from nearby coal-fired power plants. After the aluminum is cooled, it's ready to be made into new products. How many aluminum products do you use? Now we'll look at how paper products are produced from a renewable resource. Of the trees logged in the United States, 25% are used to make a multitude of paper products. The trees harvested for paper making come from natural forests or tree farms. There are 5 major steps involved in paper production: harvesting, chipping, pulping, bleaching, and forming. In the first step of paper making, specific types of trees are harvested, either by clear-cutting large areas or by selecting individual trees. Although clear-cutting is an efficient way of harvesting trees, it contributes to erosion of topsoil and the frequent flooding of rivers and their ecosystems. Logging also destroys habitat for species like the spotted owl, found in old-growth forests in Washington State and Oregon. The spotted owl is just one of thousands of species around the world endangered by our need for wood products. After specific trees are harvested for paper making, they're measured to a prescribed length, cut, and transported to the woodyard of a paper mill. At the mill, the second step, called chipping, begins. The logs are carried up conveyors and fed into revolving drums where the bark is stripped away. This bark is usually burned to generate energy needed to run the mills, thereby reducing the dependence on fossil fuels. The debarked logs are carried to the chipper machine, where sharp revolving knives shred the logs into millions of wood chips, ready for the next step. At this stage, the wood chips are taken to a pulp mill and put into huge pressure chambers that boil them with steam and chemicals to make pulp. This solution is transferred to another tank, where the chips break down into a pulp slurry. In fact, 99% of the pulp is water. Bleaching is the fourth step. Because consumers demand white, gleaming paper, the brown pulp has to be bleached with chlorine or other chemicals before it's made into paper. Using chlorine in the bleaching process creates cancer-causing byproducts called dioxins that are dumped into local waterways where they enter the food chain. So more paper mills are substituting safer chemicals like hydrogen peroxide for bleaching. After bleaching, the pulp stock is fed into a paper machine where it's mixed with additives, cleaned, and flushed with water. The pulp is then ready for the final step, where it's formed, pressed, and dried to become fresh new paper, ready to be manufactured into all kinds of products, from toilet tissue to food packaging to newspapers. In our demand for convenience, we throw away products shortly after we use them. The same products that took so much energy, labor, and natural resources to create. We need to realize that beyond the price of the product, there are also environmental, health, and disposal costs involved. In the United States, consumers throw away more than 200 million tons of trash or municipal solid waste a year. This is enough trash to fill a large stadium twice a day for a year. More than half of this mountain of trash is dumped onto large open areas called landfills. Can you guess what makes up the bulk of the waste found in landfills? The majority of the waste is paper products, followed by yard and food waste, metals, plastics, glass, and other materials like wood and rubber. Half of the existing landfills in the U.S. are closing because they are full or do not meet health and safety standards, and few new ones will replace them. Open land is scarce, especially near large cities, and people just don't want landfills in their neighborhood. Much of what is not thrown into landfills is burned in incinerators. This process reduces the volume of trash, but can emit toxic substances into the air. The toxic ash left behind also contains hazardous substances that eventually get dumped into landfills. In essence, we're taking raw materials like bauxite out of one hole and putting the finished product, like an aluminum can, into another one. How can we reverse or reduce such destructive, wasteful practices? Recycling is an excellent solution that involves the reprocessing of used materials to make new products. Thus, we reduce the need for mining and harvesting valuable resources, as well as reducing trash in landfills. Paper products, aluminum and steel containers, and glass and plastic bottles can all be recycled. Collection is the first step in the recycling process. Waste materials like aluminum and paper are put out on the curb to be picked up by haulers and taken to drop-off centers or to buyback centers that pay cash for the recycled items. The collected materials are taken to a materials recovery facility, or a MRF, where machines and workers separate the recyclables. At this MRF, mixed recyclables are dumped on a conveyor belt and then moved to an area where non-recyclable items are separated by hand. The ferrous materials, like steel cans, are separated by a giant magnet which attracts and sends the steel cans to a storage hopper. The rest moves to a screening machine that takes out smaller materials like paper labels and other unwanted substances. The lighter plastics and aluminum materials are captured by an incline sorting machine. Bar screens separate plastics, which are then sorted out manually by resin or type of plastic. Here, milk jugs go into a separate container and are then shredded. The soda bottles are packed into 800-pound bales. Conveyors move the aluminum materials into a hopper, then onto another conveyor which takes them to a baler. Finally, paper is moved to a separate conveyor where it's transported to an automated baler which packs the paper for shipping. Now that these recyclables have been sorted, decontaminated, and baled, where do they go from here? Recycled materials are shipped back to the manufacturers for use in making new products again. We'll first follow the aluminum bales and later the paper bales back to the factories to see how the recyclables replace the original natural resources. At the smelter, shredded aluminum cans are remelted into pure molten aluminum and poured into molds to cool. The solid aluminum blocks produced are called ingots. The ingots are pressed into sheets that are wound into huge rolls, ready for an aluminum can manufacturer. The rolls feed machine presses that punch, stretch, and form the aluminum into cans. Cans are washed, dried, labeled, and coated with a protective layer. Then they're filled with popular beverages and sealed. ready for delivery to stores to be purchased and used once again. So aluminum can be used repeatedly. Using recycled aluminum materials instead of mined aluminum creates a 95% energy savings. That's because the need for mining and the energy-intensive processes of refining and smelting is greatly reduced. Now, let's see how recycled or waste paper can be used to make new paper products. Recycled paper is sent to a paper mill where it's put through a hydropulper that mixes it with warm water and pounds it into a pulp. Contaminants like paper clips and rubber bands are strained out of the pulp through a coarse screen. The ink is chemically washed or floated off in a process called de-inking. The pulp is then cleaned, bleached, dried, and made into new paper again, ready for the manufacturers who make products from recycled paper. Each person in the United States consumes about 1 tree a year worth of newspapers. That means that if everyone recycled all their newspapers, about 250 million trees would be saved annually. And imagine all the landfill space this would conserve. Aluminum and paper goods made from previously used materials are called post-consumer recycled products. Are you purchasing these products to help support the recycling markets?
Thank you.
In addition to recycling, did you know that you can reduce waste by precycling? This calls for reducing the use of materials and reusing what you already have. Here's how. You can reduce waste by purchasing fewer disposable products, buying in bulk, and choosing products that don't have excess packaging to throw away. You can reuse materials by repairing broken items instead of buying new ones, finding new uses for containers and keeping products longer. In order to minimize our dependency on dwindling natural resources and conserve landfill space, we need to apply all 3 R's. With an ever-increasing world population placing such heavy demands on our Earth, we're forced to seek new solutions to meet our growing needs. Instead of sending materials from the mine to the landfill, we need to recycle, reduce, and reuse to lessen our demand for natural resources and relieve the consequential environmental impacts. And with increased awareness and a desire to change, we can alter our habits and find a balance between consumption and conservation.